back when I was looking into learning about different blockchains, once you start seeing the philosophical difference of what Ethereum is trying to achieve, you can't unsee that. And it made total sense, and I had no other option, that I wanted to work in the Ethereum ecosystem. It was where all the bright minds were, much brighter than me. It's where all of the energy was at the time. And I think once you understand the philosophical differences of what Ethereum is trying to achieve in the world, that just made it really special to me. And I loved the innovation. I loved that you could just turn up and build anything you wanted and people can use it. You didn't need to ask permission to build on top of Ethereum. And I loved that.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic. Today's show features the head of ecosystem at the Ethereum Foundation, James Smith. This was a great catch-up with someone who has a real insider's view of the massive reorg and change at the Ethereum Foundation. And I think more broadly, how that is impacting the direction of the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's clear from this discussion that the Ethereum Foundation has figured out a better way to engage with founders and just the broader community at large. I'll also just add that there's an element of competition that I can feel that's more pervasive within the EF. Not that they weren't trying to win before, but I think it's just much more palpable that they are competing with these other chains, with these other ecosystems. They're competing for the interests of, Wall Street is entering the conversation and they want to win there as well.
So if you've listened to our previous interview with the co-director of the Ethereum Foundation, Tomasz, I think this is complementary to understanding how is the EF engaging with DeFi applications built on Ethereum. What are the kinds of relationships that they are looking to facilitate for new founders, creating a more friendly, welcoming environment for those who want to build on Ethereum. And I think overall, we came away with a very, no surprise, bullish sentiment around their marketing and business development efforts that go beyond the legacy world-class research that comes out of the Ethereum Foundation.
I think something that stands out to me about James, and we've been, liking his posts on X a lot leading up to this conversation. That's kind of what sparked it. I feel like he's such a good communicator in that he simplifies a lot of the Ethereum messaging, much like a Tom Lee does. Like Tom Lee has that special ability to take some of these complex topics and synthesize them into great sound bites and talking points that a broad spectrum of people would be able to understand. Not just, hey, somebody that's in crypto or our niche, but I think they speak to a broad audience. And yeah, I think James just does a really good job in that arena.
So before we get started, just a quick reminder, you can subscribe at the-edge.xyz. That's the best place to subscribe to the Edge newsletter and to get real-time notifications for the Edge podcast anytime we release a new episode. You can also check out our link tree at edge_pod. That's the best place to subscribe to the Edge podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And then one last shout out to all of our sponsors that make the Edge podcast and the Edge newsletter possible. Sponsors like TOROS Finance and REDSTONE. Otherwise, we hope you enjoy the episode. Grow wealth exponentially. With TOROS leveraged tokens, when the market moves in your favor, your gains become parabolic. They're built to ride trends, auto-compounding profits. With TOROS, it's simple. Pick a vault, deposit, and your exposure is multiplied, maintained, and protected automatically against liquidations. TOROS reduces risk and keeps you in the market ready for the rebound. When markets dip, the vaults auto-adjust, softening losses and preserving your position. Just pick a token to multiply your returns. TOROS Finance, exponential gains with leveraged tokens. To learn more, go to toros.finance. REDSTONE is building the Oracle backbone to unlock real-world finance on-chain and next-gen DeFi. With modular gas-efficient feeds across over 110 chains, trusted by 170 clients, supporting over 1,300 assets. From value-accruing stablecoins, liquid staking and restaking tokens, to treasuries, private credit, and commodity tokens, Redstone delivers accurate real-time data where it matters most. The biggest platforms and protocols in DeFi today choose Redstone oracles, such as Athena, Securitize, BlackRock Biddle, Pendle, Spark, and Maple Finance. If you're building the future of finance on-chain, you need Redstone's leading modular blockchain oracle layer. To learn more, go to redstone.finance, and thanks to Redstone for supporting us here at the Edge Podcast and Edge Newsletter. Banks use your money to line the pockets of shareholders. Meanwhile, Solstice uses the same yield strategies to line your pockets. Introducing Yield Vault, Solana's best yield. A live delta neutral strategy with positive returns month over month for 3 years. Built for internet capital markets and powered by the stablecoin USX. To learn more, go to solstice.finance. Neutral is the next generation of crypto-native yield. Their synthetic dollar NUSD taps into OTC arbitrage, funding rate inefficiencies, and delta-neutral strategies to deliver premium, stable returns without taking market direction risk. Neutral is currently live in private beta and will be opening for public deposits soon. Learn more at neutral.fi. All right, let's introduce James Smith, Head of Ecosystem at the Ethereum Foundation. James, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking today.
I'm wondering more about your background. How did you ever become Head of Ecosystem at the Ethereum Foundation?
Without going too long into it, I worked in London for many years and decided that I wanted to do startups. The startup life was for me. And I ended up starting a really ambitious idea, which failed miserably. And then I ended up finding about e-commerce. And I started 2 e-commerce companies, which I ran for a few years. And it was a logistics nightmare with all of the physical products. It was in the health space. And after I sold those 2, I decided what am I going to do with myself? So I started playing around with DeFi. And I started falling in love with projects like Alchemix, which was self-repaying loans. You can buy ETH, can't be liquidated, take out a loan. I think I remember watching some clip about somebody buying a speedboat with it and stuff like that. So it was just quite a fun time. And there was so much energy as people were exploring this. And I fell into it by getting more and more involved in protocol governance in some of these smaller coins as well. And that was actually really fun to do. And you learn just so much. And then I hadn't looked for a role for about 9 years by this point. And I saw something come up at the Ethereum Foundation. So I started talking to Danny Ryan. And after about 3 or 4 months of conversations, I ended up starting and getting into staking research. So I set myself an ambitious goal. I was like, how am I ever going to teach Danny Ryan something about staking? And I realized I'd set my goal really, really low here because it took me about 24 hours. And I was like, okay, staking's a big, big world. Here we go. And I was the guy that would just go and talk to lots of protocols because we're a very research-led organization. We've got a lot of people that want to read all of the documents, understand how it works, so they're not caught out. Whereas I took the approach of, I'm going to go and talk to them. What's not written down that I don't know? And everybody was so happy to talk to me and explain how things worked and take the time. And then I would find out things that weren't written down. And that became really a big secret power that I could do. And that started then drifting into tons of other projects from DeFi safety, the team I founded, we funded that. We did a lot of staking ecosystem work as well. So after this, and then we started doing proactive grant rounds because we, at the Ethereum Foundation, we have a long history of giving out grants. But I was thinking, well, if we think about rather than stuff that comes into us, what does the ecosystem need? And we start being proactively searching for grants. This all led to then probably about 9 months ago, where I said, well, we need to engage with the ecosystem a lot more. We need to be out there talking to businesses, founders. We need to be doing more with the ecosystem to help support and coordinate with them. And this is where we were missing a piece. So about 4 months ago, we announced a big reorg, and then I was the head of the ecosystem, which is about 13, 14 teams at about 50 people.
It's funny because I know we have a lot of questions about this reorg. It's part of the reason we wanted to have you on. We've seen all the change from the outside. I've noticed just how the Ethereum Foundation is so hyper engaged now with DeFi and with DeFi founders. But before we get into that, can you just talk a little bit more about what made Ethereum special for you? Like, you could have worked on lots of different blockchain ecosystems, I'm sure, and probably found a lot of value in that. I'm curious, what in the end was the thing that drove you to stick with Ethereum?
So that's a great question. I think back when I was looking into learning about different blockchains, once you start seeing the philosophical difference of what Ethereum is trying to achieve, you can't unsee that. And it made total sense, and I had no other option, that I wanted to work in the Ethereum ecosystem. It was where all the bright minds were, much brighter than me. It's where all of the energy was at the time. And I think once you understand the philosophical differences of what Ethereum is trying to achieve in the world, that just made it really special to me. And I loved the innovation. I loved that you could just turn up and build anything you wanted and people can use it. You didn't need to ask permission to build on top of Ethereum. And I love that. It's a bit like the internet when you first started. It also, you can just build a website. You don't need to wait for anybody. And that made it really special. And that's when I discovered so many projects coming out. Not all of them survived, but that's absolutely fine.
James, can you get into just a few more of those philosophical differences, the things that really stood out in your mind?
Yeah, so I think of Ethereum as invisible infrastructure that isn't trying to... let's take the revenue example. So lots of charts and things compare who's making the most revenue as a chain, and Ethereum is not up there. And I actually think that's a mark of success for Ethereum. Not everybody may agree with me on this. However, I think people, businesses, individuals can come onto Ethereum, build on top of it, and they can create and make value. That's where I think there's a big philosophical difference. Also, from a permissionless perspective, and there's many use cases you can build, the innovation happens. If you can't build on a closed wall, like a cloud computing service. You just can't see something and say, hey, I can build something that will be really helpful for that. And that, to me, is what makes Ethereum special, where you can just build stuff that makes a lot of sense, and it can be very practically done. And I've seen many people get jobs in the ecosystem just because they turned up and they built stuff. And that, to me, makes Ethereum really cool. Whereas in a closed wall system, you just can't build stuff.
Actually, James, you told us a little bit of a story offline that sort of ties into that last point, where you said people can just show up and build stuff. I think you were talking about an emergency room doctor or something. Can you maybe share that story? Just so I think it illuminates a lot of the special qualities, a lot of the intangibles of the Ethereum community that are, aren't always very apparent or obvious.
Yeah, so there's a number of stories about people that work at the Ethereum Foundation. Eric is a really good example. Me and Eric had 24 Discord channels in common, so we thought we should be friends. And we then got chatting. We spent about 12 months to 15 months getting to know each other. And then Eric came and joined the team. And he was great. And this kind of the person that was just showing up. I found him in an MEV group that Justin Drake was also hanging out in, and it was really fun. So there's those types of people. There was a emergency room doctor that was on GitHub on the ethereum.org website, and it got to the point where he was doing so much coding on that website that it was getting embarrassing that we weren't paying him. So we started talking to him, and then we started having a chat, and he's based in America. He's been working with the Ethereum Foundation for about 3 years now. And that's such a great story. That's just someone that showed up, wasn't expecting anything. He's very passionate about what Ethereum is trying to achieve. And he's also a really good person in the organization that is able to remember why we are here when we're having lots of different discussions. You've got a couple of other people that were volunteering at conferences. They were, somebody was running meetups for nearly 5 years. And I was so impressed with her. I thought this is an opportunity that I think we can take all of that experience that you've got and you can help other meetup providers. You can help other community members and how you grow. So there's a ton of people in this organization that have just shown up. There's Tony on EF Research. Tony was just making dashboards. And Justin Drake got in touch with him. And now Tony works in EF Research unit. So there's a ton of people that just showed up. And that's what I really loved about Ethereum as well.
Yeah, there's literally an Ethereum community in basically every major city around the world at this point. And you could easily just, get online and then head to a meetup pretty easily. And I think that is something that just, you can't really replicate that. That takes time. That takes a lot of depth.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me about the community of this other chain appears to have a bigger community. It's just because the Ethereum community has different names and we don't have it under one collective umbrella. The meetups and the conferences are huge. And there's team leads at the Ethereum Foundation that just went to a meetup. The particular one I'm thinking about went to a meetup in Glasgow in Scotland. He just showed up there. It was like 50 to 25 people. And what happens? He now starts working at the Ethereum Foundation 4 years ago. And that's where we don't try to be flash with it. There's so many studies of enterprises and organizations that show up with swag, show up with money, show up with pizza. And as soon as that money dries up, the meetup dries up, which is why we try to keep it very authentic. And we try to, people that are passionate about wanting to run it for the right reasons and run it for longer. So we don't feel like that's a really great use of funding in our mind, but we do want to offer tons of non-financial support in the future there because we think that's super important for long-term growth in all of these areas. It brings me to another point about conferences. I think some of the conferences have been really fantastic, but we're starting to slightly change our strategy on that in terms of we feel like the world has changed and we should go more niche. So Privacy for Enterprises one-day conference in New York. Staking for XYZ one-day conference in Zurich. And I see the excitement in protocols built on Ethereum when I tell them that this is what we want to do. And I see the excitement on the organizations that want to attend this when I tell them what we want to do. And then the world has moved into this more specific areas that we want to fit into. Whereas these community hubs we're building, I don't know if you guys are aware of this. We've got one in London, one in, I'll say Hong Kong is coming. We've got one in Africa. We've got another one. We've got one in Berlin, which is actually the EF office has opened up. So we've got more and more coming online all the time. And these are great places where teams, founders, investors, Ethereum enthusiasts can all meet. So we're starting to build much more of this authentic meeting points than we are trying to throw money at it.
I think this is a good segue into talking about the difference between EF after the reorg you mentioned, many months ago versus Legacy EF. Legacy EF for me was a world-class research organization that happened to occasionally hire really sharp marketing and BD folks. Those folks would, whether it was like running meetups or events or, creating like a beautiful website. I think the Ethereum website, ethereum.org is just a beautiful website. Credit to all the designers there. But there's been a sharpened focus since the reorg. And I think what you mentioned with the community hubs reflects that. What can you tell us about the difference between Legacy EF for all the good that I mentioned versus where your focus is today?
So Legacy EF, I think giving you a bit of background, we were giving out grants and the grants were aimed at anything that doesn't make commercial sense to fund. The Ethereum Foundation could help or at least initiate and start up. So this might be dev tooling for projects. And this is why I think the dev tooling ecosystem has been so healthy in the last few years. So that's something we did a lot of. We weren't set up. If a founder approached us, we probably came across as quite unwelcoming, which was never the intention. We actually just didn't have a plan. We were like, what do we do with the founder? No idea. And that kind of always didn't sit well with me. And I feel like we have decided to take a step in and talk to founders, get feedback. We've started from the acceleration team. We've now got the dev growth team, which Austin runs, which is on the ground university initiatives. Plus also we're going to start launching some digital developer growth as well. Some of the best developers we have seen and some of the best projects we have seen don't go to hackathons anymore because this has kind of become a bit of prize farming. I actually would love to do some tests where the prize is not cash, but you win a month in a house to build your startup out. Maybe we would get a ton of different teams turning up to this. So we also do some more online things on that world. And then we also want to encourage developers maybe building on top of, Uniswap, Aave, ether.fi, and actually spotting opportunities. So I mentioned it to you earlier, this is how Morpho started. Morpho was just playing around on Uniswap v4 hooks. And then they spotted an opportunity of how they could build out a whole protocol. And I feel like that's an amazing story, which hasn't yet been told. And that's something our founder success team, we are shocked by how overwhelmed they are by founder requests. And it's actually great, but it's a 3-man team. So they can only take so many conversations in a day and do people justice. So we're starting to build out a founder network, which we're doing in DevConnect. And we're going to have Stani go and talk to founders. We're going to have Mike from ether.fi talk to founders. So we have got some really world-class DeFi founders that can go and talk to new set of founders coming through. And I think that's really positive, and that's the way that we can scale through ecosystem engagement and everybody collectively offering their own experience. It is extremely valuable. And the idea here in the future is that we're going to start doing videos of people and having a channel where we can get some of these projects, not talking about their technical protocols, but about how they got started. What was their break? How did they do the marketing? What do they recommend to first-time founders? I think this type of education is severely lacking. So we're trying to bridge that gap there. And lastly, we've got 2 more teams actually. Enterprise team. So this is quite obvious to what they do. They're going around and they've done an amazing job so far of talking to, they just ran a conference in Hong Kong aimed at enterprises. They've been in Saudi Arabia. They've been in America. They have been in Latin America. They have been everywhere so far. And they've received really good success that people want to engage with the enterprise team. And we can help out with technical requests, amplification. Sometimes they want support for thinking things through. And you should see that team as a coordination switchboard function as well. And then we have an app team. And the app relations team, people really are shocked when they're like, you guys didn't have any formal plan to talk to Aave or Lido on a regular basis. Or no, we did not. And people think that's really funny. I think it's great because it's what made Ethereum special. You don't need to talk to us. You can just build and make something super successful and you never have to talk to us. And that doesn't mean we don't like you. That's amazing as well. But now we're starting to get tuned into feedback, blockers, how we can help out as well. That it all is starting to be received extremely positively as well. And we've got lots of things in each of those teams. It's only been about 120 days so far. So phase 1, I would say, we're finally completing. We've just hired people into these roles. And now in 2026, we're setting up really nicely to do some really exciting things.
I think the social fabric that you're describing of Ethereum, it's there because the incentives make sense. It's there because, someone like Lido created all of that liquidity for liquid staked ETH. And then someone like Aave sees opportunity to use that liquidity in lending, borrowing markets. And then someone like ether.fi comes along and sees opportunity to improve upon what Lido was doing, but with like a restaking angle. And so I have had a tough time over the years explaining to, random strangers and friends that I know who, they'll mention, I've been in crypto since 2017 and I hold XRP. And I heard someone say this recently. I hold it because I like the cross-border payment use case or something like that. It was the most ridiculous conversation. And I'm trying to communicate all that's been built on Ethereum and just, share the flashy numbers, stablecoin liquidity, DeFi, TVL, and so forth. But what really makes Ethereum special is understanding that the incentives just make sense and that it is a thriving on-chain economy where, folks they're building because they see opportunity, not because they got some, absurdly large grant, or they see an opportunity to just grift and build something that they can extract value from. There's a mission-driven element, and there's, again, like real crypto economic incentives at play. But it's so difficult to communicate that without actually seeing it, in front of your own eyes over many years and understanding like what is the world ledger. Well, I've experienced it. I'm using that world ledger for all these different DeFi use cases.
It's a pretty foreign concept to just show up and build something that then becomes worth millions, if not billions. And we usually have to ask anyone to do that. We're usually having to ask people, and we can build on top of their projects. I actually saw Morpho. You can now buy uranium in a physical storage, and there's no management fee. And I was writing about this, and one of the Morpho founders was like, I didn't know about this. And I was like, really? And then suddenly I was like, of course you don't. People could just build on top of it. That's awesome. And there's like some really, this is exactly what we're talking about here, where a lot of it is celebrated rather than not celebrated, but it is a mindset shift from how you think about building in the open. And this is where the open source software, I think the European Union did some research, and every dollar spent on open source software generates $95 in economic value. And that is because of how much stuff gets built on open source software, which is where I think, but the world doesn't see that as a thing they should double down on because it's really hard to quantify.
This episode is brought to you by Mantle, pioneering a revolutionary new category called blockchain for banking by bridging TradFi and Web3 into one unified stack. With on-chain transactions, TradFi rail compatibility, and integrated DeFi features, Mantle is reshaping how financial services work. Their flagship app UR lets users hold fiat and crypto all in one Swiss-backed account, making real-world finance usable on-chain. To learn more, go to ur.app and follow Mantle_official on Twitter.
Katana is an opinionated blockchain. Its opinion is that for DeFi adoption, there are two key things we need: deep liquidity and high yield.
To learn more, go to katana.network. As a DeFi investor, I turn to Maple for permissionless institutional quality yield in a single liquid asset backed by over-collateralized loans. Maple's Syrup USDC and Syrup USDT are now supported as collateral for enhanced yields on major DeFi liquidity hubs such as Pendle, Fluid, Camino, Jupiter, Morpho, and soon Aave. To learn more about Maple, go to maple.finance.
James, listening to DeFi Dad's story there about talking to his friend about XRP, I thought of just how you have to go about explaining Ethereum sometimes. And again, sometimes I wish we were rolling the cameras before, because you told us another little tidbit about a speech you gave at the European Union. And I think you said the way you phrased it was they asked you to be controversial, but I think the way you framed it up is very applicable and I think very good for basic understanding and drawing parallels from Web 2 world to, hey, what is Ethereum? What is the mission actually trying to do? Can you Can you rehash that again for the benefit of our listeners here?
Yep. So if I start off telling you about CrowdStrike, I don't know if you remember this, happened last year. It happened in July 2024. 8.5 million computers got switched off overnight, and it meant people couldn't get cancer scheduled that day had to get cancelled. People taking flights had to get cancelled. There was like a ton of things that cascaded, and it was all because somebody sent a 4 kilobyte update at 4 a.m. in the morning and crashed all these computers. So it wasn't even a malicious hack. And that showed how paralyzed we can be built on a single vendor software system. So if somebody wanted to switch off the economy, I don't think it's that hard. If you think about if somebody wanted to switch off Visa and MasterCard, all of the payment rails are gone in 95% of the places immediately. So rather than talk about blockchain, I decided to use the internet as an example. So the internet has no CEO. There's actually an article I've written, but I haven't released it yet. And to me, that's the exact reason why you should trust the internet, because nobody owns it. So it sounds strange if you're hearing it for the first time, but I think that's a lot of people get it. And the internet was built to survive a nuclear war. So if a cable gets cut in the Baltic Sea, internet traffic just routes around it. If you've got many implementations but one standard, if one of those implementations falls over, the other many just keep going. And what am I? I'm describing clients on Ethereum here. So if a client goes, the others keep going. And I think this is why the internet has 100% uptime, but never had a global outage. And this is the same for Ethereum as well. So when you're not reliant on this, the way I tried to say it to the European Commission actually is, you're trying to recreate the same single vendor software problem, but located in the EU. And I said, you actually have the opportunity to do something else. Why don't you create many cloud computing companies that if 2 start negotiating really badly with you, you've got 18 others to go to. If 1 falls over, you've got 18 still online. So the economy doesn't crash. You don't do it because it's slightly more expensive to implement for the first time, but it actually saves you a fortune. CrowdStrike, I think an analysis was it cost $5.5 billion in the first few hours in economic value. So that was like my case for trying to explain what Ethereum is trying to achieve in the eyes of something that people could understand with the internet.
I think what goes along with that, too, is the misunderstandings about decentralization over the years. It's very difficult for someone who has never really thought about decentralization and what does that even mean? It's a big word. It's not a word that you think about. But when you start to experience DeFi and you recognize something like Aave, it's a lending and borrowing market that technically no one owns. There is a governance there, of course, so there's some sort of voting rights, but it's this beautifully designed protocol that has different market participants coming together to work together to achieve their own goals, which happen to be symbiotic, as they all work together, lenders, borrowers, liquidators, and so forth. I love the story you shared about Morpho too. What a cool thing to hear that they had a market stood up that the founders, had never heard of. Actually, another example of this, going to this idea of true decentralization, where you have a flourishing economy on chain, and those who helped to stand it up in the first place have lost track of everything that's being built. Vitalik was tweeting about, writing about the need for credit, under collateralized loans, under collateralized borrowers. And although this isn't exactly what he was referring to, and he's pushing this idea of low risk DeFi, we read one of his posts and Nomadic and I were like, oh my gosh, he doesn't know about 3Jane, or maybe he doesn't know about Wildcat. We had Wildcat on the podcast not long ago. And so we were excited that this is a use case that was being explored years ago and it was growing, but then it had a major setback in the last like bear cycle following the FTX sort of blow up and all of that. And so it's so exciting when you realize, gosh, we've gotten to a point where some of the most brilliant, most, locked in people in our space don't realize everything that's being built, which includes us as well. We are always surprised to learn about, yet another protocol that's being built on Ethereum. And again, that is a part of that's proof of decentralization itself.
Decentralization sounds scary to a lot of people. And sometimes I have to change my language depending on who I'm talking to, just so it can be understood. And I phrase it through, I was speaking to the Central Bank of Malta. And I said, well, if the Central Bank of Spain built an infrastructure layer, you wouldn't use it because you would be owned by this. This is what you would think. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. But you wouldn't build something and expect other people to use it. So this is why you need a neutral layer. Now, that doesn't mean giving up your data or giving up anything. It just means you're building somewhere where the infrastructure means you can choose who you want to interact with and how you want to do that. And that was a good way, I think, of trying to explain Ethereum's values to them.
And I would argue that a decentralized economy, one like we see in DeFi, is the most capitalistic system you'll ever see. It is purely being driven by incentives and, folks basically finding a way to work together to accomplish their own goals and to work together in a markets-driven structure. It all makes sense versus the Ethereum Foundation choosing winners and, allocating enormous amounts of money to maybe save a protocol that's been exploited. Things fail all the time in Ethereum, and we deal with the consequences of that. But you are, truly free to transact and do whatever you want on chain. Speaking to all of this, I am reminded of all the ways that you have been highlighting Ethereum is cooking. That's the term I've seen you use, is Ethereum is cooking. There's a tweet we'll share on screen here. And you have done such a great job of articulating lots of ways that Ethereum is growing and maturing and all of the different protocols that are building. And sometimes those are things that people just don't know about. They're just not aware of, again, because there's so much being built. But I also think you've done a great job of just helping folks to, again, better understand the ways that Ethereum is winning that they might not, be aware of. So I want to talk through some of the points you make here. Maybe we just talk through these, topic by topic. One of those that is like recent news is there's this protocol advocacy alliance that is self-organizing. What is it? What's the meaning of it? Why is it important?
So the Ethereum Foundation generally takes a view to not get too involved in policy topics and regulation topics. And I think that's a very good move. A lot of people have previously questioned it. However, we're playing for the long game of many, many years. So this is a number of very prominent protocols that got together and decided to work very, very closely together. And they feel like they could go speak to policy. And I think it's actually great. I think it's a fantastic initiative that it highlights the self-governing, and they have taken control of that. And we don't need to be the center of attention or the only actors in the system. And I think it's a really, really positive move. So they're going to go and talk policy and standards to a number of different regulators around the world. And I think that's a really exciting development that's come.
Another one that you mentioned in this post is Etherealize is out here building products. I feel like some of the products that they've been building are still somewhat undisclosed, but I don't know if you have more insight of what they're actually working on, or if you can share anything?
I actually spoke to them today. They are doing some very cool stuff. I can't spoil their fun for them, but I think you're going to start seeing some really cool tech coming out of them. They are building products that they hope to be able to change some of the whole banking software system. Some of the banks are on software they haven't upgraded since 2003. And they are working on some pilots that are going to change exactly how those banks operate and make it a lot smoother.
What about ZK technology? Can you just talk to us about why has Ethereum leaned so intentionally into zero knowledge tech? And I guess, like, what does it promise? What are we excited about, in the coming years?
So it offers a ton of promise. When you go to universities and you start explaining zero knowledge to maths students, they're like sucked in. They're like, whoa, this is amazing. And I think, so you're the zero knowledge, one part of this privacy, so prove you're 18 without showing your ID is a great one. So I think that's really cool. And I remember falling in love with it when I saw Battle Zips, which was a very experimental project a few years ago where you played a game of battleships and could prove that you won without showing the game. And that's what people have been experimenting with for a long time now. But now there's also a lot of scaling EVM, or should I say, that's really coming to its own here. So there's multiple things going on with ZK. And I really believe that, a lot of people I've spoken to throughout the years think that a Nobel Peace Prize is going to someone who's working on ZK tech right now. It's a huge unlock for the world. If you don't need to show your credentials, but you can prove who you are, that's a great privacy implementer when more and more of life is digital. In fact, nearly all of it.
I recently benefited from ZK. I use 3Jane, and 3Jane allowed me to open up an under-collateralized line of credit. So I've got the ability to borrow X amount of money, but I have no collateral deposited. That said, they have created a credit score on chain. They've also looked at a bunch of other, factors in my credit score in, the physical world, the legacy finance world. And so they have some sort of ZK TLS integration. And so I connected Credit Karma, bank accounts, a few other bits of information, which normally would make me uncomfortable, even though it's necessary if you're, working with the legacy banking world. We've all had to do it. If you have something like a mortgage, or if you've opened up a loan, you're used to just giving up all this information at once through credit bureaus. This was the first time I've ever applied, for a loan where I was able to do this on-chain and put up no collateral, but at the same time not have to give up all of my data. And so that's magic to me. I mean, assuming it's working as intended, fingers crossed, but that was the first time I've really experienced that.
My understanding of ZK TLS, which is zero knowledge transaction layer security, is that you can download a bank statement, for example, send it to me and prove that you have not edited it on the way. So they're able to take those bank statements without necessarily needing the approval of an API, for example, because they couldn't just trust you wouldn't download it, then add a couple of zeros on the end, and then send it to them. Whereas with TLS, that's been a huge unlock, that they're able to check a lot of different sources. Plus, you can redact things. They may not be able to read those things, and then they can give you credit. And you're going to see way more things like this coming online. There's a buy now, pay later project being built with exactly the same use case.
River is building a chain abstraction stablecoin system that connects assets, liquidity, and yield across multiple chains. Season 3 is live. Earn River points by using SAT-USD in DeFi such as Pendle, PancakeSwap, and Uniswap. Stake River points to accumulate more, or convert points to River tokens whenever you like. To learn more, go to river.inc. Hey folks, I want to tell you about our sponsor Gearbox, the protocol that reimagines on-chain lending. With Gearbox, you can access 10x credit across DeFi or lend for passive yields with single asset deposits and no impermanent loss. Users can access leverage to margin trade, stake, farm, and more. To learn more about Gearbox, go to gearbox.fi. Puffer Institutional delivers secure, high-yield Ethereum staking built for institutions. With battle-tested security, granular access controls, and the ability to boost APY by securing multiple AVSs, Puffer gives institutions full control and optimized returns. Puffer is also behind the Unify-based rollup, aiming to transform Ethereum's future in a world where all L2s are working together. To learn more, go to institutional.puffer.fi.
Just jumping back into this post that we're referencing, another point you made is privacy projects are going live on Ethereum. Curious what more you can tell us about that. Obviously, privacy is back big. It should always be a big thing, in my opinion, but it's got a lot of mind share in the space right now.
Yeah, so we've been talking about privacy a lot more online, and we've been talking to a lot of projects. I think we found something like 120 independent privacy teams building on Ethereum. And then at the Ethereum Foundation, the Privacy Scaling Explorations, PSE cluster, has just reorientated itself to be fully focused on privacy. And this is really good because we get questions a lot from across the layer, but mainly on the enterprise side about privacy. And they're very confused as well. They're like, is there privacy on EVM? Is this a thing? Can we ever get this? And it really depends on when we say, well, what is your use case? And then we start breaking it down to who's really thought about what that means to, how do we implement that? So one of the best things I think is there's a ton of energy in this space, and there's going to be a ton of different solutions, which is what we need, because I actually think of it two ways. Privacy cuts two ways. You've got privacy for people in power, not necessarily. Or you've got, should that project have privacy, because then you don't know what you're getting into if you want to supply money on chain or something, or deposit it. So not everything should have privacy, so we should have, and then a lot of users should get privacy, a lot of normal users. So I think with a number of different implementations happening, there's going to be different use cases coming up all the time for stuff. And I think that that's the important thing across ID, finance, a lot of other things as well. So there's also things like, we were talking to a team that actually implements Ethereum into chocolate factories, which is wild. I was like, you do what? And it's all around traceability. And it's actually, their need for privacy is much less and much different to a finance transaction. So there's a ton of different use cases out there, which I think is what can get quite overwhelming on privacy. I don't think that, and a lot of the projects coming out these days are looking to get integrated into other projects, so they don't necessarily have a token. So there's less hype and excitement about tons of these projects coming out, but they are building, and they're really smart teams that are building in this space.
There's another post that I just saw you tweet out in the last few days, and I think it captures another bit of misunderstanding about the legacy markets versus the privacy that we're seeking with, something like Ethereum and all of these developments. The post, and we can flash this on screen for folks that are watching the podcast. Privacy is not normal. Every stock trade is public within milliseconds. The New York Stock Exchange processes 3 billion shares a day, which is all visible. When trades go dark, that's market manipulation. Bernie Madoff went private, and it was a $65 billion fraud. Trillions depend on everyone seeing the same data. Blockchains just applied stock market transparency to all of money itself. Anyways, what else can you tell us about the point you're trying to make here?
Yeah, so I wrote that tweet because I feel like everyone says privacy is normal, but actually blockchain is about an open ledger where if you want to do transaction with another party, you can trust what's on that open ledger. And then there's a settlement to say, hey, this actually happened or this didn't happen. And there's a privacy cuts two ways. Politicians, we should demand more transparency in certain actions from them too. And that I think is important for us to remember as well. So I feel like the privacy market should have different privacy options that are different use cases. And this is something we're trying to help a lot of people navigate at the moment of what do you need privacy exactly for? And those conversations have been super interesting actually to navigate and understand what people are looking for, because even financial institutions have different ideas of what they mean by that.
James, what are your thoughts on tokenization? Because when we talk about Ethereum winning and we talk about Ethereum seeing real adoption, a huge part of that story is RWAs or tokenizing, real world assets. So yeah, what's your thought on the state of tokenization and RWAs?
I think tokenization's at a fascinating point because a lot of companies have been testing it out. I put up a tweet and you can see there's been a steady growth of it. And then as this starts being accepted, you're starting to see the number of companies issuing is going through the roof. And not even the media can keep up with all of the announcements in my mind. But one of the cool things I'm seeing about tokenization is a lot of these are now not trying to just put it on the blockchain. I think that was originally let's just put something tokenized on the blockchain, a real world asset, but then it just sat there. So it was kind of on parade and not doing anything. Now people are coming to us and they want to integrate with DeFi. They want to be able to use it for collateral. They want to be able to use it for yield generation. And we're starting to see what blockchain was really formed for, assets on chain that then you can get an 18-year-old crack coder from Italy building something that could use that asset. And that's where the innovation unlock comes in. To me, using blockchain and its permissionless structure, you're going to start seeing people using tokenized assets on blockchain in ways we've never seen explored before in financial institutions. And that's the phase I'm starting to see a lot of people start to lean into as well.
James, something else that's on the horizon is the Fusaka, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Fusaka upgrade. What can you share about that? And I guess what will be noticeable to users of Ethereum when that update goes live?
The huge headline is blob space is going up by 8x. What does that mean in practical terms? You're going to see way, way cheaper transactions come through. It's going to be huge, and it's only the start really. So Ethereum has always tried to keep its scaling in line while being decentralized. But through some of the technology unlocks, we're able to keep the decentralization, but scale a lot faster at the moment. So we're starting to see the best of both worlds come together. And this is what you'll see continuously throughout 2026 as well. I actually think one of the best things about Fusaka is it's the second upgrade Ethereum is having this year, which I don't think has been done before. So you'll actually start, I think that's taking recognition that the core protocol developers, which is external and people inside Ethereum Foundation, are shipping a lot faster. And I think that's very, very cool to see. So you should start seeing more regular upgrades coming. I'm personally working on ERCs, which is an app layer of standards. So we're getting lots of apps. Now we're talking to them. We're getting feedback. We would love to build this, but there's no standard for it to be implemented. So we're starting to work very closely on how can we create more of a ERC ethos as well. It's always been the poor cousin to upgrades, whereas now I want to bring it to the forefront as well, because these app standards will unlock way more innovation on the app layer as well.
Something else we were talking about before we got going here was, I'd never thought of this, but you made a good point about Ethereum's open roadmap not leaving room for surprises. Because we were talking about, when you're looking ahead, you want to get excited about things and find things that to look forward to. But again, everything's kind of out there, and there's no earnings call where Vitalik hops on and says, hey, guess what? We're going to do this year. And nobody knew, and it was stealth. And, everybody claps and the stock goes up 20% overnight. But yeah, like, speak to that a little bit more. And then, my question to you is there any surprises you can spoil for us? Is there anything exciting going on in stealth that you can share maybe?
Yeah, so the point you just highlighted is exactly right. If you're a NVIDIA or iPhone come out with, hey, we've got this amazing phone and it can walk and talk with you as well, and it completely surprises the market. Whereas building out in this open world, you expect everything that's coming, which is actually great in lots of ways, but people maybe don't understand the psychological element that has when they're choosing whether to hold ETH or not. That's my view on it. So that's where surprising the market can be extremely difficult. However, that's absolutely fine in my mind. In terms of surprises we've got coming, I think some of the most exciting things is on the ecosystem engagement. So we want to have more Ethereum ecosystem advisors. So take the founder network. I'd love to have founders. I'd love to have you two talk to founders about getting on a podcast. And how do you make that? How do they make that work? You were saying how accessible you actually can be in lots of ways. And I think that's great. I think I gave a story to someone the other day. They went to a stablecoin conference, and the only project they remember were two cowboys walking around going, "We got the wrong kind of stable, boys." It's the only project they remember. And it happened to be a social media team from Taco Bell, I think, that were doing it. And I love that because I'm like, okay, let's get them in, and they can help other founders out as well. They might generate more business off the back of this, and I think that's great. So we can ideally help coordinate and support the market, and I think that'll be fantastic. So the mentor network will be really good. We had a website team called Ethereum.org, and in the reorganization, they're now called Digital Studio. So we're going to start explaining Ethereum through video, and we're going to start doing other video topics as well, which I think is really important. I've had this conversation of, how do I get to find out about Ethereum? And nobody has a really good answer. They say, well, check out Twitter, read some posts, and maybe in 6 months you'll piece it together. And that's kind of the best answer everyone's got. So I'm going to start building out. One challenge for me in the next few months is I'd love to build a 30, 40-minute video series where anyone can understand very quickly what Ethereum is trying to achieve.
Yeah, just get that down to 20 seconds and put it on TikTok, and that's all you need.
Before we wrap up, what's one thing you think is, completely misunderstood about the Ethereum Foundation? What's the most misunderstood thing about EF?
I would say the Ethereum Foundation's treasury, because I think of us as way more of a scrappy startup in the way we get initiatives done. So there's 4 people on our enterprise team. We could make it 16 people tomorrow and their diaries would be completely full still. But we don't have the treasury budget to scale in that way, which is why we have to think of more creative ways than just adding people. And this is mentors we can do, digital content that we can do, niche conferences such as the staking for enterprises. And that way we can talk to 200 people in the room in one day. And we can also invite all the staking protocols to get involved or node operators to get involved to help educate as well. And I feel like that is how we have to think about a lot of the initiatives that we're doing is what's the scrappy startup play here. And that's probably one of the things that I think is most misunderstood at the moment.
Guys, I think this is a great place for us to start to wrap up. So first, I want to remind our listeners, they should follow James's personal X handle at James_Gaps. They should follow the Ethereum Foundation handle at Ethereum FNDN. And then check out the Ethereum Foundation website at ethereum.foundation. James, thank you so much for your time. It was really nice to get to talk through all these really difficult topics. I think a lot of the questions we asked you, we could have had like a whole podcast on any one of those topics, but I think you gave a nice overview of just all the things being worked on in Ethereum and at the Ethereum Foundation. So any final word here before we go?
It's been great to talk to you. Anyone wants to reach out to me, feel free to. Love to hear more people from the Ethereum ecosystem. We're trying to improve. We're trying to make things better and experiment as we go.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. To stay up to date with future episodes, plus get expert tips, strategies, and exclusive content, subscribe to our free newsletter at the-edge.xyz.